All right, welcome to the Lair of Secrets podcast, the podcast about gaming and being a geek by two middle-aged geek dads. I'm Ken Newquist, and I'm caught in the hell of migrating to a loaner laptop after my work laptop started dying. Whoever thought up of natural scrolling on the Mac should be locked away in the lowest level of the lair.
I enjoy natural scrolling. I've heard
it's terrible. It's an abomination. It's an abomination.
But are you on a loaner Windows machine, or is
it's
another?
Mac.
So it should still be natural scrolling, or did you turn it off on your older one?
They call it natural scrolling, which is the antithesis of what I do, right? Okay. So natural scrolling on the Mac is like
if you put fingers down on a piece of from what I understand. Welcome to the Tangents podcast. What I understand that their explanation is Steve Jobs liked the natural scrolling was like if you put two fingers or if you put your hand down on a piece of paper and pushed it away from you, like you'd be pushing with your finger and the paper goes away, therefore you scroll up that way.
Oh.
Yes. But it's wrong, and I don't like it.
Or is it the opposite of that? Okay.
So I don't know. I have it set up so that if I scroll down, the page goes down, right?
Okay.
So if I drag my fingers down, the page goes down.
Natural
scrolling, the page goes up.
Okay.
It's the opposite of what I think it was. I also invert my controls on the Xbox. So
yeah. You and Chris Johnson both use flight controls on the Xbox. So.
And my daughter, but not my son.
Right.
So we'll get into some of that later. But wait, who are you?
Yeah, I am David Moore, and I just traveled back to Ohio recently. Traveled with my family to watch my youngest win second place in the world in the Winter Guard A class, which is the very first year that Brownsburg participated in the WGI World or WGI A class national/world competition, and they got second. And they weren't super close to getting first, but they were pretty solidly second.
Very cool. And congratulations.
Yep. We all went. Isleen cheered her sister on. Speaking of Isleen, tonight we are joined by my eldest daughter, Isleen.
I'm not the youngest, sorry to disappoint.
Yeah. To talk about her experiences in gaming and contrasting it with what Ken and I grew up with. She's also pushing back her D&D game that she had tonight for us to talk with us for a while. So thank you very much for coming on and pushing back your D&D game.
Should only be about a half hour. We normally start at 8:30, but like today my DM said we can start at 9.
Okay. All right. We'll try
Never start on time anyway, let's be honest.
No, that is okay. So this is one of the things that we wanted you on for. Was to talk about the differences between Ken and I being one generation of gamer and you being another generation of gamer. And evidently starting on time is not something that has not changed in my experience over generations of gamers.
Clearly not.
I'm not sure if it ever will change.
One of the things that when I started in gaming, I went to a summer camp, and my roommate there had a copy of Tunnels and Trolls. And then at night, one of the college students who was one of our counselors would run a basic D&D game. My parents said, hey, you should look into that. And then we got the basic D&D set after I got home from that summer camp. And that's kind of how I started off in gaming. And it wasn't until many years later that I went to Gen Con as a freshman, and actually right after my freshman year in high school. How did you get started gaming, Isleen? I know, but those people, Ken doesn't.
I don't.
Yeah, so I was definitely raised by gamers, so it's kind of just something that I've been doing my whole life. I went to my first Gen Con before I could walk, actually. Most of my gaming experience, however, has been more on the electronic side, so a lot of video games and such. I guess my first real game outside of little girl games was Pokemon Platinum, and I played that when I was 7, and I could not put that down.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of just got more into that as I got older, and now that I'm 19, I do D&D with a couple of my friends on usually Thursdays, although right now we have this Tuesday campaign going on, which is funnily enough today. And we usually do those over Discord since most of us live over an hour away from each other. So like we'll join Discord, get on a site called Roll20, and then we'll just do that for a couple hours.
Yeah, so that was my next question on here is how do you normally game? So you game on Discord. You said you use Roll20 for tabletop moving and stuff like that?
Yes, Roll20. It's like Roll20 does have like maps and like little icons that we use as our figures, and it also keeps track of handouts and character sheets.
Mm-hmm.
Although for character sheets, we usually use something like D&D Beyond.
So it sounds similar to some of the stuff that like Ken and I have done when we've needed to use a virtual tabletop like Roll20. We also use one called Owlbear Rodeo. What games do you usually play? Tabletop. Well, I should narrow it down. What tabletop role-playing games do you normally play? Like D&D, etc.
Mostly just D&D, to be honest, outside of the occasional like card game with the family. So like Flux is something I really enjoy, but that's mostly how far it goes.
That's more, it's more board and card game. We did try Gloomhaven.
I still want to try that.
Okay. I have to find time when you are free.
Yeah.
And we both have to get over the fact that we will forget. So it's like we're at the stage, I think, in our lives, like you were in the stage in college where we have to go and put an invite on the calendar and say, here is the hour or 2 hour block of let's hang out together sort of thing. Mm-hmm. We can talk about it in a future podcast, but I did just pick up Lego Star Wars, the Skywalker Saga. And my youngest and I have played it, and I know Isleen and I will be playing it as well. So
yeah, I just picked it up as well. My kids were like, my daughter, I think, well, you're the same age as my daughter, and so I think she started playing the original Lego Star Wars when she was like 4, maybe 5, and she was terrified of Palpatine because he had this cackling laugh, right? And so every time he would come on for that scene, she's like, I don't want to do this. And she would leave the room and then come back after I defeated that level and move on to the next thing, which I'm sure she's really super thrilled about me saying. But I'm looking forward, there's so much raw nostalgia with Lego Star Wars that I cannot wait to play it with my kids. She's very excited to come home from college. She's very excited to come home from college and do it. So anyway.
Yeah. Sorry. My sister and I used to play the complete saga a lot as kids, and I'm gonna be honest, I could barely comprehend what I was doing. I was just running around collecting coins.
We did that a lot. But that's I mean, as a young kid playing Star Wars, playing Lego, any of the Lego games, you can just have fun going around breaking things and picking up the Lego studs. Yeah. So that is to be expected when you are like 6. Right.
Yes.
Right. And then you can appreciate more things later. So
mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I actually got it because I saw that you had gotten it, Ken. So
I was just talking about it with my son, and he said we were kind of just like reminiscing about playing it, and like so we played like the original trilogy together, and then we got like the Clone Wars one. And like my daughter and my son would play the heck out of that, but my son used to drive my daughter crazy because he would just like smash bricks, get out his lightsaber, attack her repeatedly, and she like whenever they would get on an elevator, he would just like start winging his lightsaber around. And so I think I can't wait to see what shenanigans they get up to when everybody's back in the same house for a few weeks and they can play Lego Star Wars together.
That's cool.
But we digress because that's what we do.
Yep. Should we rename the podcast to like digressions and tangents?
the digression.
Yeah. So what's your main gaming group? What's the size? How many people are there in your primary gaming group?
That is a good question. I honestly haven't counted, but if you're talking about D&D, it's probably about 8-ish people if I had to rough it.
That's pretty big for an online group.
Yeah.
Like one of the things that Ken and I are used to is gaming face to face. And your face to face gaming consists almost entirely of convention games, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So like one thing that we notice has happened in face-to-face games is there are people that will kind of sit back and just listen or not do a whole lot. But sometimes, you know, if you're depending upon the group, you can kind of pull them in, you know, call on them, pull them in, etc. Does that happen in your group?
Yeah. So like the only real difference that I found is that we can't like really see each other's faces, but we still use voice chat as much as we can. So we still have the whole like talking communication thing going on. We definitely have the more active players in our group, like the ones that kind of like carry all of the action and the ones that are kind of just there. So like usually what my DM will do is kind of like he'll kind of like try and force them into a situation almost, or just kind of be like, hey, what's your character doing right now?
Mm-hmm. Calling on them and making sure they're not, if they want to hang back, like what I've discovered is if they want to hang back, that's fine. But I also want to make sure that they're not like getting talked over or whatever. So I basically, you know, I'll say, hey, what are you doing? Or do you have something you want to do, or something appropriate to the situation that everybody's in, you know, and try and give them the spotlight for a second. And if they want to take it, they can take it. But if they want to sit back, they can, you know, do something short and then sit back. You know, some people just really enjoy hanging out with their friends, and gaming just happens to be a convenient excuse to do so. So
yeah.
Gaming groups do you have? I think you mentioned 2 games, but do you have the same set of friends with that game, or is it?
It's the same set of friends.
Okay.
So what's happening right now is because the reason the one shot campaign exists is because one of our players that normally is in the Tuesday slot is on hiatus. So we just have like a smaller section of some of our friends in that group instead. So it's me and 3 other people, not including the DM.
Okay, cool. One of the questions that came up right before this was, how do you find people to game with? Like, have you known these friends for a long time and then decided, hey, let's play D&D, or somebody suggested it?
It's kind of a complicated story how I ended up here, but it's kind of just like I met a bunch of people through a mutual friend, then I met more people through mutual friends, and we all kind of just like met each other through mutual friends. We all ended up in the same server, and then someone brought up the idea of doing D&D, and we were all into it. So
I noticed that Ken is furiously writing some questions. So why don't you ask one of your questions?
So one of my questions is, why D&D?
That's a good question, to be honest. I don't know. I just thought it looked fun.
Because I'm curious, like, it was the default for us, because it was pretty much the only thing. I mean, there were some other things out there, like, you know, Star Frontiers or Top Secret or these other things that came out in the early 80s. But now, like, D&D is really popular. So strangely, I guess that's my other question, is like, what is your friends' impressions of D&D? Like, when we were kids, or like when I was in college, like, student government was like, when they heard we wanted to form a role-playing game club, they're like, but what if people try to hurt themselves because their character died? Right? Like, seriously, this was a major concern.
That was a serious concern back then.
It was the early 90s. So yeah, it was different. Like, people kind of looked at you sideways if you're playing D&D.
Oh, like, well, D&D is honestly pretty much normalized these days. Nobody really bats an eye about it. Like, I could wear a D&D shirt to school and nobody would look at me funny.
Yeah, I remember if you wore I remember wearing a D&D shirt or carrying around like the player's handbook or Dungeon Master's Guide, specifically so that other like-minded people who played would get the signal that, hey, because there wasn't like a way to showcase that, hey, I like to play D&D. You know, if you're into a sport, you wear whatever sports jersey, you know, or a baseball cap or whatever. But if you're into D&D back then, there was not merch to wear. So, very few t-shirts, if any. Yet for some reason TSR made beach towels, but but yeah, that was like how one of the ways I would find people, and potential new friends at school would be to carry around the book outside the backpack, and see who popped up.
Oh, I think another reason for how popular D&D has gotten lately is because of how many podcasts are streaming D&D. So like the Adventure Zone, Critical Role. Like I have, like one of my friends in Color Guard back when I was in high school was really into Critical Role, and my girlfriend is really into the Adventure Zone. Just how those podcasts kind of like took off, got more and more people into it.
We were ahead of our time, Ken.
Oh yeah.
Yep.
Nuketown
and the Game Master Show.
I feel like walking around high school with certainly in like grade school and middle school, I certainly brought my books into school. I think in high school, I don't know, we were very traditional, John Hughes sort of nerds and jocks and what have you. Sort of high school, very much like freaks and geeks. Like you're going to get picked on if you have a D&D book, right?
Yeah,
like,
it was more middle school for me. But then high school, I started at a new high school. There was the whole, let me just find friends in general. And it happened that several of them did play D&D. So that was, I didn't feel the need to do that there. But in middle school, yeah, gotcha. That's definitely where that happened, was like starting in 6th grade.
Yeah, I think we all just stopped playing in high school. Like amongst my friend group, we like every once in a while people would get together, but it really didn't kick off again until college when we got there, and they were like, guys, we could play D&D and like people aren't going to make fun of us. I mean, the student government has some issues. I wrote a report and everything. It was great to debunk the myths around Dungeons and Dragons at the time. It was great.
Yep.
So I'm curious about like what's your campaign like? Like, so what's your style of play? Is it like dungeon crawls? Is it high urban fantasy? Like what do you guys like? What are the stories?
Yeah, so the campaign I'm currently in is the Strixhaven campaign, which is basically like this magical university with like 5 houses and such. We tend to have I feel like we tend to focus a bit more on role playing than actual combat. And just like interactions between the party and the NPCs, like to bring up my girlfriend again, she's kind of going around treating it as a dating simulator almost. and my other friend, his character and my character are twins, and I think it's really funny to have my character tease his character after she almost dies for the 3rd session in a row.
That's cool. Yeah, I would say most of my early stuff was really just dungeon crawls, and then we got into like more actual stories once we got to college, because people had longer attention spans.
Yeah, I definitely tend to prefer the actual story-based games over just like constant combat session after combat session. Like honestly, like if they're drawn out too long, it almost gets a little boring.
Yeah, so do you regularly have like actually 8 people at the table, or is it if you have 8, you have 8, but generally like 4 or 5 show up?
It's usually like it kind of depends. Most of the time we usually have like 1 or 2 people absent, and that's just because we're all college students. Some of us live in an entirely different country, so we work with what we have. But most of the time, the group is generally in pretty good attendance.
Cool. Do you have any other questions, David?
Big, huge question is, do you have any questions for us as older gamers? Compared, like what was it like for us compared to you? Or
back in my day,
yeah, we killed dragons uphill both ways with the rusty toothpick.
How dare you flip the script on me like this? I was not prepared.
Sorry. Is there any advice out there for people who are getting into gaming that you have as a young gamer? Like, how could they get started in gaming?
Google is your friend, for one.
Like we tried to have a game here that didn't quite gel. Evidently you kind of got it, kind of fell into gaming, even though it didn't happen in our household that much. How did you learn D&D?
Honestly, I'm still pretty like rusty on it, I guess, if that makes sense. Usually if I have a question, I'll just ask someone in the group or like look it up myself. Like there's a nice thing about D&D Beyond is that in certain campaigns, you can actually the DM can actually give the players access to the books they have. So I believe how it works, I can just like look it up through there, or I can just look it up online.
Gotcha.
It's nice to just have that like resource, so I don't have to go flipping through a textbook looking for the right page. I can just Google like, oh, what does acid splash do, and there it is.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's definitely another thing that's different between how you play D&D and how I played D&D. Like playing a spellcaster, I would have gone through the player's handbook so often. You'd say, it's like, I'm going to cast Acid Splash. And maybe if you're GMing, you're just like, okay, well, what does that do? And I'd be like, okay, well, page 57, second column, midway down, here's Acid Splash. Like I would just know it in my head because I'd opened up that book so many times.
Yeah.
I have noticed that if I'm doing something D&D related or watching something like a Dimension 20, like the Unsleeping City is the one that I'm been watching lately, and they're like, I cast this, and it's like, does that work like that? How does that work? Whatever. And then I'll do a quick Google, and like there's the top 3 searches are like D&D Beyond and Roll20 and like the open source wiki for like all of the spells and such and all the creatures, etc. And yeah, it's a really easy way to look stuff up.
Yeah, one of the nice things as well about having the virtual character sheets is I tend to play spellcasters as well, and it'll have all the information in the spell like preloaded into its database. So whenever I add a spell to my list, all the information is there. And I can also just like click on the name to cast it, and it'll roll for me.
Yeah. As much of a curmudgeon as I am about D&D Beyond and going, well, I have the books, why do I need to buy them again? That sort of functionality is really, really nice.
Yeah, I was also kind of like at D&D Beyond when I found out I had to like buy the books myself first, like as well too, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think I have to get Strixhaven. Is it Strixhaven or Strixhaven?
STR. I corrected your spelling in the notes so that you can look it up.
Yeah.
I think it sounds really cool.
It's been out for about a year or two, I think, since, as you know, Ken, the Sunday games, other than the game, like the Scum and Villainy game, there's no other game right now. I did manage to pull off a Mutant Crawl Classics this Sunday with Aaron and a couple other friends who are in Sparks campaign that Aaron and I have been in for decades now.
So many.
And so we got about halfway through the level 0 module, and 3 people have already died out of the 12 characters. So it's definitely a meat grinder for that sort of game. Yeah, I think if I was going to play D&D a lot more, especially online, I think D&D Beyond is something I would probably end up picking up.
D&D Beyond is a really nice website to have.
Yeah,
I can see it. I think we do the same thing you guys do. Like we have such a hodgepodge. None of us have broken down and actually bought books in D&D Beyond. I think because we're just too curmudgeon-y, as David said.
We're too used to it's like, well, I already have the physical book. Why do I need an electronic copy? Or how do I read it as a book in electronic form? I don't want to read a giant PDF. I'd rather read a physical book, but that's just,
that said,
that's my generation.
Right. I have one of my NPCs is in D&D Beyond, so I have been using it more. It's just like I just haven't gotten to buy the books. What you were gonna say?
Yeah.
I think it also helps that my DM probably didn't own the books that he does on D&D Beyond beforehand, so
the fact that D&D Beyond is licensed through Wizards of the Coast to do all that stuff is great, but it also means they don't do like a bundle deal where it's like, oh, buy the physical copy and get a deal, or like a break off of the price on D&D Beyond or something like that.
Yeah.
It's like full price in
Right.
2 spots. Unlike Evil Hat, where if you buy a physical copy at a brick and mortar store, you can go onto the Evil Hat website for any of the books that they sell, that they publish, with the receipt from that brick and mortar store, and they will give you the PDF of that book for free.
I did not know they did that.
Yep, it's pretty. They've done that ever since the beginning, and it's awesome.
That is pretty cool.
It supports brick and mortar gaming stores, but it also gives the PDF style stuff if you want to, if you have a tablet and you don't want to cart around the books all the time.
Yeah.
I will say having like a tablet or a phone or even a laptop is so much lighter than for a GM, like back playing second edition, taking the player's handbook, the GM's guide, the Monster Manual 1, 2, and Fiend Folio, and any of the class splat books that they decided that you decided that you needed to bring with. And then all of the paper notes that you would bring and maps and everything like that.
God.
You know,
Yeah,
you'd have a 50 or 60
nightmarish.
you'd have a 50 or 60 pound backpack as a GM.
And then go to Gen Con.
Yeah, and then carry it all Gen Con.
No.
That's the first time I went to Gen Con in Indianapolis is when I realized I needed to stop doing that.
Yeah.
Because I had way too many books and I was just going from one end of Indianapolis to the other. Well, at least it felt that way.
Yeah.
It's much bigger than Milwaukee.
I will take a backpack, but at the beginning of the day it's empty, so that when I go to the dealer room, it gets full. It's a lot easier to carry around a backpack than a bunch of plastic bags. So
Very true.
thanks for coming on, Isleen.
Thank you.
We'll if people are interested in talking about new gamers versus old gamers, or new gamers and old gamers, it's not it should not be a fight. It should be, we all come together and have awesome times.
I didn't even know there was a fight.
There are always a few people
That's fair.
who like to do a flame war.
It's got drinking from the
People
garden
argue
hose
about things on
energy.
the internet.
Yep. Feel free, Isleen, to take this next section and give it to your friends as well, which is thank you for listening. If you have feedback, we love feedback. You can send it to us at podcast@lairofsecrets.com or contact us via Twitter @Lair of Secrets. We stream this live on Twitch if you want to get your fix of things early and unedited. We are Lair of Secrets, one word over there. So twitch.tv/Lair of Secrets, which we normally stream 8 p.m. Eastern on Tuesdays. And then sometimes we'll have a gaming thing on Thursdays. We'll try and put it on the channel. But if you follow us, you'll get notifications. So anyway, you can also visit lairofsecrets.com and leave us some feedback, topic ideas, or your own thoughts on what we've talked about. Hopefully you're already listening to this podcast and know where most of those things are. But if someone gave this to you on a mixtape, head over there and subscribe to the podcast. If you know people out there, go ahead and give them all this information. Get them on board. Get them on board. We can also be found on like Apple and a couple other places as well for podcasts. So anyway, thanks again, Isleen, for coming. And thanks to everybody out there for listening to us.